Okay, it's another episode of Rise Up with Marc Mixon, where we're going to be doing the vice presidential debate. I don't know. Are we live streaming this or are we just recording it?
We are live streaming right now. We are on YouTube and Rumble.
There we go. Live streaming. Well, and here we go. They started on time. Let's go to the debate.
Oh, do you hear the audio there?
I do not hear the audio.
No, hold on a second. Let's see what's going on.
They're shaking hands. Are those the moderators? They must be.
I bet I know why.
Questions will be directed at one candidate who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator. The primary role of the moderators is to facilitate the debate between the candidates, enforce the rules, and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact.
No. My bad.
Claims made by each other.
CBS News reserves the right to mute the candidates' microphones to maintain decorum. We have not shared the questions or topics with the campaigns.
No, I expect this to be legitimately actually a much better debate. Frankly, like I've heard Tim Walz speak on
Tonight,
the
our country is facing
trail.
several unfolding crises.
I've heard
the Middle
JD
East is on the brink
Vance.
of war. Americans are suffering
They
from
both
the
seem
catastrophic
competent public
Hurricane
speakers.
Helene. And now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora.
Boy. Let's hear who's going to.
Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed, thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent
Israel?
A regional
you mean
war.
after their
Iran is
week
weakened,
plus of bombardment
but the
and
U.S. still
their
considers it the largest
invasion?
state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has
Iran attacked
drastically
Israel today, if you didn't
the
notice.
time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon.
Counterattack, right? Because Israel's been bombing them for
or
weeks,
2
and they
weeks' time.
launched a ground invasion a
Governor
few days ago.
Walz, if you were the
Well,
final
have they
voice
been bombing
in this
Iran or have they
situation
been bombing
room, would you
Lebanon?
support or oppose a preemptive
No.
strike by Israel?
Well, they have been bombing
Iran. You have
Iran,
2
but no,
minutes.
it's been
Well,
Lebanon. They've been
and
really
thank you for those
hitting.
joining at home
You're
tonight.
right.
Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas
No,
terrorists
it's not where it started.
massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Iran.
But it's funny how Israel has not massacred tens of thousands of innocent Palestinians. Just the fucking
hostages back.
The language that, like, all of these candidates, like, they all had to be sat in a room and someone had to talk to all of them about these are your talking points.
The expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago. A nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense,
here we are with the Democrat talking points.
His national
Trump
security
bad,
advisors
scary.
said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to them, to Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to be able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together. Understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the vice president said today we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit, because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me. And she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look, Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about what the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. Nora?
Margaret, thank you. Let's turn now to Hurricane Helene. The storm.
Except he did keep all of the engagements and conflicts and many wars that we had around the world. He kept those going, and he did send Scud missiles into Syria. So
stronger.
Yeah, that's true. But I think the point that Democrats are escalating wars in ways that Trump didn't is a true statement.
Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane, because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of two grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then of course afterwards to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities
really
that I
good
love.
about
Some of them I know
controlling the
very
narrative.
personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job. And I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. Now, Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say, Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America, because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the
Carbon
opposite.
footprint is off the
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening.
Silliness,
Look,
just
it is a horrific tragedy.
Controlling the
this
narrative,
hurricane.
right?
And
like
my
we
heart
need to
goes out to the
reshore, we
folks
need
that are
to
down
produce the
there,
energy here.
in
We need to
contact
like
with the governors. I serve
he's
as
framing it, and then
co-chair of the
he's
Council of
good at it.
Governors.
He's
We
good at
work
controlling
together
the
on this
narrative.
Didn't
emergency
realize
management.
that I was getting my
Governors,
energy from
no
China.
partisanship. They
Thought it
work
was
together to all of the governors
the
and the
illuminating
emergency
company.
responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover, but we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution for us is to continue to move forward, that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time.
We are
you're
producing
creating
more
the
oil
jobs that we're
than at
seeing
any
all
time
across
ever
the
before
country.
under
That's
the
exactly
Democratic
what this
administration, and
has
that
done.
is
We are
not what
seeing
we
us
need.
becoming an energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what
I
absolutely
feel like
makes
every
sense. And
administration
then we
has
start
that
thinking
bragging
about
point.
how do we
We're doing
mitigate
it
these
more with
disasters.
Obama. We did it more with
Thank
Trump, and
you,
now we're doing
Senator.
it
I
more
want to
with
give you an
with
opportunity
Biden.
to respond there. The governor
It escalates
mentioned
no matter
that
who's in office.
President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly, Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think,
have to have
one
more
in
mining
the
in
past
the
40
United
years.
States, and that would be
Natural
cleaner.
gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing
Senator,
worse by
your
the
time
climate.
is up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Well, look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil, but the folks know, and
It takes a lot
I
of
can
oil
say it
to make
again,
those solar
these are
panels.
not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our number one export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure that we're protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that. And an all above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. We're going to turn now to immigration. The crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border consistently ranks
And the news
as one of
barely
the
covers
top
it.
issue for American voters. Senator Vance.
Yeah, that was an
your
interesting fact
campaign is
check when I
pledging to
don't think
carry
anyone
out the
argued
largest
against it, but
mass
she had the fact
deportation
check ready,
plan
so
in
she had to
American
finish.
history,
Yeah.
and to use the U.S. military
Well,
to
the
do
Republicans
so.
love to
Could
say
you be
that they
more
actually are
specific about
supportive of this,
exactly
but
how
then their
this will
policies
work?
have never been.
For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil? You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. I had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has gotten clean. I don't want people who are struggling with addiction to be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris let in fentanyl into our communities at record levels. So you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations. And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got
Well, there was
20,
actually
25
quite a bit of
million
funding that
illegal
was going to
aliens
go
here in
down to
country.
the border,
What
and
do
then
we do
Trump
with them? I
had
think
the
the first thing
Republicans
that we
kill
do
that
is we
because he
start
didn't
with
want
the
it to be
criminal
something that
migrants.
Biden's
About 1
administration
million
was
of those
to be
people have committed
able
some
to hang their
form
hat.
of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you ask about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
Real leadership is
Governor,
when Trump
would you
says that
care
he
to
screwed up.
respond
Oh,
to
wait,
any
no,
of
he
the
never says that
specific
he screwed up.
allegations, including that the vice president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things regarding children?
The drug mule is not true, but I will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history. 30% decrease in Ohio, but there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of the largest state, a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this. And that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents, detection for drugs, DOJ money to speed up these the adjudications on this, just what America wants. But as soon as I was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against it because it gives him a campaign issue. It gives him what would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they need to be done by the legislature. You can't just do this through the executive branch. So
another point, a majority of the children that traffic drugs across the border are American citizens.
And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall, and Mexico will pay for it.
Most of these drugs
Less
are
than
not
2%
coming in
of
with
that wall got
migrants
built,
who
and
are,
Mexico
who
didn't
are
pay a
looking
dime.
for work
But
and
here we
fleeing.
are again,
They're
9
American
years after he came
citizens
down
who
that
are
escalator,
going south to get drugs
dehumanizing
and bringing them back north.
people and telling him what he was going to do. As far as the deportation plan, at one point, Senator Vance said it was so unworkable to be
That was an
laughable.
interesting sidelong
So
glance
that's
at the
where we're at.
camera.
Pass the bill, she'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, the question was, will you separate parents from their children, even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris.
Donald Trump
open border. And I
separated a
didn't
ton of
accuse
children
Kamala
from their
Harris
families when
of
they crossed this
inviting
border
drug
during
mules.
his
I said
administration.
that she enabled the Mexican drug
They
cartels
made no
to operate
effort in
freely in this
making sure
country.
that
And we
you
know
knew
that
their
they use
names or
children
where
as
they
drug
came from.
mules, and it is a disgrace, and it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of illegal crossings. We had a record number of fentanyl coming into our country. And now that she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo 94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem is leading to massive problems in the United States of America. Parents who can't afford health care, schools that are overwhelmed. It's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president again.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, what about our CBS News polling, which does show that a majority of Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations?
Look, we fix this issue with a bill that is necessary, but the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this, and Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true, don't do it. There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Lankford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Tim,
Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding. So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive action, solve this. Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our borders are. Kamala Harris has been. And it's actually
do you do
heartbreaking
that?
because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help.
Gotta make
But
them
most
feel
of
like
this
they
is
have
about
the
the
power.
president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say,
You're a
if you try
video
to come
guy.
across the border
Are they
illegally,
using
you've
both
got to stay in
mics, the
Mexico,
clip-on
you've got
mics
to
on
go
their
back through
tie
proper
and the
channels.
mic that's
Now,
on the
Governor Walz
lectern in front of
brought
them?
up the community of
Or
Springfield,
is one of them
and
a
he's
prop?
very worried
I
about
would
the
guess
things
that
that I
that's
said in
redundancy.
Springfield. Look, in Springfield,
So if a
Ohio,
mic
and in
fails,
communities
they'll have
all
the other
across
mic.
this country,
The
you've
clip-on
got
mic is
schools that
probably
are
a backup mic.
overwhelmed. You've got hospitals that are overwhelmed. You have got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim. And I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala
I
Harris
love
does.
how they
Senator,
keep,
your time is up. Governor,
how
you have 1
he
minute to
keeps
respond.
like
Yeah, well,
hammering on
it
Kamala
is law
Harris as if she
enforcement that
makes
asked
any
for
sort
the
of
bill.
policy in the world, as
They
if the
helped
vice
craft it.
president does
They're the ones
anything
that
other than like
supported it. It was
photo
that's
ops and go to
because
the
they know
bar.
we need to do this.
It's like
Look,
they've
this
had that talking
issue
point of she's the
continuing
border
to bring this
czar.
up,
It's like there's no such
of
thing
not
as
dealing
that.
with it, of blaming migrants for everything. On housing,
We don't
we
have
could talk a
czars
little
in this
bit about
country.
Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree. It should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles.
Look at the
I don't
CBS
talk about my
logo in
faith
the
a
center
lot,
of the QR
but
code.
Matthew
It's very Big
25:40
Brother-like.
talks about to the
Oh,
least amongst us you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it.
I'm
This
trying to
bill
listen to them,
does
I
it.
promise.
It's funded.
I
It's
know.
supported by the people who do it, and it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you,
It's
Governor.
more
And just to
substance to this
clarify
debate than the
for our
previous one,
viewers,
or especially
Springfield,
the
Ohio
Biden
does
Trump
have
one.
a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected
Well,
Yeah,
status.
this is actually, I think, the
Margaret,
best
but
debate
thank
we've
you.
heard
Senator,
so
we
far.
have
They are
so
both
much to
actually
get to.
talking
Margaret,
about
I think
issues.
it's important
We're gonna
because
turn out of the
debate-
economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
the rules were that
The
you guys
economy,
weren't going to
we're-
fact check. And since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal
Fascinating.
status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That
Thank
is
you,
the
Senator.
facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by
Thank
our
you,
own
Senator, for
leadership.
describing the legal process.
Those laws-
We have so much to get
opened up
to,
that
Senator.
pathway.
Those
We have
laws
so
have been on the
much-
books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The
We
CBP
wanna have-
One app has not been on the books.
It's time to mute them. There you
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora?
Thank you,
I
Mark.
don't think she is
The
actually.
economy
thankful.
is a top concern for voters. Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan. So let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President
You're
Harris unveiled a
mansplaining that
plan
to
that
me?
includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you in a house. A house is much more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs $5 to make insulin. They were charging $800 before this law went into effect. As far as the housing goes, I've seen it in Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis, prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class. $6,000 child tax credit, we have one in Minnesota, reduces childhood poverty by a third. We save money in the long run, and we do the right thing for families. And then getting businesses off the ground. The law as it stands right now is $5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this. He kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm gonna give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it, it would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do, we'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our system works best, more people are participating in it, and folks have the things that they need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis of the Trump plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit.
It's a joke. Donald
by
Trump can't speak to any
5.8
policy
trillion.
that he
My question
supposedly
is the
has.
same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
No, he's got
Well,
no
first
idea.
of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer. A lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do, and some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies. And what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of
power you have,
fucking
you get
shit.
5%. Drive the cost of housing
Yeah,
higher
they really
by
want
about
to distance.
60%.
They want to
Open
make
the
it
American
sound like
southern
she's
border
more
and make
equal to
middle
Biden.
class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans
He's a
for how to
senator.
address
Their
middle class
people
problems,
actually could be
then she
doing the thing.
ought to do them now.
Congress
Yeah.
Not
does
one
not.
asking for
That's right.
promotion,
The vice
but in the
president,
job the
they
American
don't do
people
anything.
gave her
They've
3.5
had no
Congress
years
power.
hides
ago.
behind the
And the
president
fact
all
that
the
she
time.
isn't
Now
tells you a
this
lot
man's
about
hiding
how
behind the vice
much you can
president.
trust
The
her
vice
actual
president should have done
plans.
that.
Now, Donald Trump's
What?
economic plan is not just a
president's
plan,
just a
but it's
backup
also
president.
a record. A
Yeah,
lot
that's
of
all
those
it is.
same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom. Because Donald Trump's economic policies delivered the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say, look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers. Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts. But if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle class and working class Americans.
A lot of
It
those
was
resources
passed
went
in
to stock
2017,
buybacks.
and you saw an
It made these
American
people
economic
richer.
boom unlike
Didn't
we've
make
seen
any
in
of
a
us
generation in
richer.
this
What are you
country.
talking
That is a
about?
record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle class?
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on
King of
COVID
debt
that
is
led to
gonna
the
make it
collapse
all
of our
better.
economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one. Whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts. Said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, whatever, how is it fair that you're paying your taxes every year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years and the last year as president? That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They
those
said if
experts
we shipped our industrial base off to other
that was
countries,
the
to Mexico
corporations
and
that
elsewhere,
said that, not
it would
the
make the middle
experts.
class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore.
Two
We're
things I
bringing
think of
American
when I think of
manufacturing
Trump:
back.
wisdom
We're
and
unleashing
courage.
American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff.
Yeah.
And this isn't just an economic issue. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much, and I hope they're in bed right now. But look, so many of the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop, and we're not going to
It can be
stop it by
manufactured
listening
here
to
by a
experts.
nation that
We're going
hates
to
you
stop
too.
it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your
Look,
time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
Well, if you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good.
Yeah, he
Much
talks
of
about
what
if
the
you
senator
strike
said right
when you're
there,
in a
I'm in
union, you
agreement
should
with
be
him on this.
fired.
I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record, 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics
that's a gross generalization.
that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home
You have
pay,
a tough
which
job.
of
You
course he
called
did.
Trump
You've got to
akin to a
pretend that Donald
Nazi in
Trump didn't
2020,
deliver
and now you're his
lower
running mate.
inflation, which of course he did. And then you simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household.
Was that in the last 4
what
years?
it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on healthcare then.
Most
Senator,
of your
Governor,
troubles that
please.
your mother
Thank
had
you,
came
Margaret.
from the Reagan
We have a
administration.
lot to get
so
to
go ahead.
ahead, gentlemen, on many topics. But right now, I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy? Your 2 minutes.
Well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now, look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there.
That's not a good idea.
To make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything.
I'm a dumbass.
Many times
literally.
I will talk a lot.
Is he implying that he's been to prison?
But being there the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this.
Sometimes I
would make
over
the
embellish
case
things.
that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I
You're
guarantee you he
thinking
wouldn't
of
be
voting for Trump. I mean, what do
praising
you
Xi
think?
Jinping
Who do you think
about
is the
COVID.
bigger
And I
embellisher?
guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing.
I don't
So
see
this
the
is
cat,
about
but I
trying
feel
to
like I keep
understand
hearing
the
her
world.
like
It's about
knocking
trying
at
to
shit.
do the best
Oh,
you
there
can
she
for
is
your
on the
community.
kitchen counter.
And then it's
That's a
putting
great
yourself
place for the cat.
out there and letting your folks understand
This
what it is.
fact check thing
My
works.
commitment,
It's not
whether it
working
be
for
through
me.
teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being
Didn't
a good
work for me.
spokesman
I
or
tried a
being a
couple of
good member
times and it just
Congress.
said the
Those
site
are the
can't
things
be
that I think are
reached.
the values that
Yeah.
people care about.
I don't know if they know that
Governor,
it isn't
just
working.
to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the
No, just
discrepancy?
all I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Vance, in 2016, you
let's just
called
say
your
they
running mate,
misspoke.
Donald Trump, unfit for the nation's highest office.
Donald Trump
And you
was a
said he
draft
could
dodger.
be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020.
The
But
tough
the Washington
questions.
Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice
Are you just
president,
a toady
why should
sycophant?
Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to
The answer to
hear,
that is
and
yes,
not
but
just
with
the
a
advice
plan.
he wants
Right.
to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well,
He's
first of all,
hoping
Margaret,
Trump will
because I've
die in
always been
office so
open.
he can
And
become
sometimes, of
president.
course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out to messages in 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration, the first round, if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States Senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising
Mitch
Joe
McConnell
Biden,
is
but the
squirming
one
in his
thing that
turtle
Joe
shell
Biden
right
did
now at that
is he
conference.
continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about
Tim
this.
Walz's
If you're
face
trying to
often looks
employ
like
slave
droopy
laborers in
dog.
China
He
at
looks like
$3 a day,
sad
you're
and
going to do that and
concerned.
undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says, you're not accessing our markets unless you're
He also looks
paying
about
middle-class
15 years
Americans
older
a
than
fair
he is.
wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank you. Now to the issue of reproductive rights.
So
Governor
what
Walz,
did you
after
think made
Roe
him like
versus Wade
Hitler?
was overturned, you
Considering I
signed a
thought that was
bill
only a
into law
Democrat
that
talking
made
point for,
Minnesota one of the
one of the things
least
that's made it
restrictive
incendiary and why
states
people
in the
want to
nation
kill
when
him.
it comes to
That
abortion.
would be a good
Former
follow-up.
President
Like,
Trump said
yeah,
in the
so you
last
admit it was
debate
wrong, but
that
what
you
did you see
believe
that made you
abortion,
think that?
quote,
That'd be a
in the
great
9th
follow-up.
Yeah.
month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said, 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to make it more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business, but those things are being proposed. And the catch-all on this is, well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic human right. We have seen maternal mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about healthcare. In Minnesota, we are ranked first in healthcare for a reason. We trust women, we trust doctors.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, Nora, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies.
Jesus, where were you?
Because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And, you know, one of them is actually very dear to me.
I grew up all over the country, and that's not that common of a thing to run into.
And she told me something a couple years ago that
1 year
she felt
older
like
than
if
you.
she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who
They need
proudly wants
contraception
to
in your town.
protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. And I think there's so much that we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically,
the point is you took one of
we
their
have a big
basic
country
options
and it's
away.
diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse, and let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Human rights
Governor,
should
would you like
not
to
vary
respond
from
and also
state to
answer the
state.
question about
We're a
restrictions?
country.
Yeah,
It
well,
should be the same
the question
from
got asked, and Donald Trump
one ocean to the other.
made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance
I'm
to
not
North
sure about the
Carolina
strategy
to
of
try
just
and
like
get her care.
showing individual
Thurman died
cases and how it
in that
impacts individual
journey
people.
back and forth.
I
The
know.
fact
I
of
also
the matter
don't
is,
think
how
it
can we
helps
as a
to talk about
nation say
2025
that
when
your life
there's evidence of
and
what's
your
going on now. You
rights,
don't have to give me
as
some weird
basic
future
as
that
the
may or
right
may
to
not happen.
control your own body, is determined on geography? There's a very real chance, had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same.
Be better to
Donald
equate it
Trump
back to
is
the
trying
past.
to figure out
This is
how to
why
get the
these
political right of
laws
this.
were
I
passed in
agree
the
with a
first
lot of what
place
Senator Vance
because
said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does
people were
not, and that's the
dying
problem.
and taking
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me
their own
ask you
hands.
about that. He
Sure.
mentioned, it was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022, talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a
Republicans have taken
referendum
a pretty
in
radical
2023,
anti-abortion
and the
stance.
people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care.
Having to carry
as far as making sure that
baby
we're educating our
to
children
term,
and
even
giving them
though it's
options,
already dead in the
Minnesota's
womb.
a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things, to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator?
May I respond to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, whether you're pro-choice or pro-abortion, that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please,
problem for your religion.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given
But how?
I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things worked best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us from increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care. So the hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget. Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to move on, and we're going to be right back with much more of the CBS News vice presidential debate in just a moment.
Okay, so real quick on the CBS News fact-checking website, it says that here's a couple things that were stated. So Walz claims former Trump White House Chief of Staff John Kelly called Trump the most flawed human being he ever met. That is true. It's those that were, this is the statement that he said, it's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he ever met. And I must add that I think over 150 former heads of CIA, certain other organizations within the government, and Republicans from Congress wrote a letter saying that he's too dangerous to be president again. There's partially true. Walz claims the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history, 30% decrease in Ohio. Opioid deaths have fallen to the lowest levels in 3 years. Provisional Centers Disease Control and Prevention figures suggest, marking the first major decrease on record since deaths first began being tallied in 2015. But it's down 18% from March in 2023, so not 30%, just in Ohio. And then Vance says Vice President Harris became the appointed border czar. That is false.
Right.
Vice President Kamala Harris was not asked to be the administration's border czar or to oversee immigration policy and enforcement at the U.S.-Mexico border. That has mainly been the responsibility of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and his department, which oversees the country's main 3 immigration agencies, including Customs and Border Protection.
Well, you got the site to work. Good for you. I've tried 3 times now. I haven't been able to, but
the QR code did not work anytime I tried it. So they took that down, and then they still had cbsnews.com. You could go to see their fact checking. So they must have realized that their QR code doesn't work because they took it away.
Well, I'm glad they fact checked the QR code and gave a different way to. Well, I got to say, this has been this has been a much better debate in almost every way. I think it's been a while since I've watched vice presidential debates, but I remember like the last time I was watching them, I sort of felt like they were better in some ways. I'm not sure why that would be. They feel a little more honest. These guys are, talking about policy more either than Trump and Harris did, for sure. There's a little bit of some spicy back and forth happening. Both of them are hitting the regular talking points. Walz is definitely hitting all those sort of Democrat talking points, but not as hard. It's not every answer. They are actually answering questions, which is the first time in the debate cycle we've seen anyone like answer questions. That's refreshing. JD Vance is an interesting cat. I think he's really good at controlling the narrative. He's a scary guy. He's very polished. He's sort of eloquent. He controls the narrative and he spins things really well. And he's one of the reasons that I feel like Democrats just focusing on and voters focusing on, Trump is this huge, unprecedented threat to democracy, is such a bad stance. Because I think there's a lot of guys like Vance out there who are way more polished than Trump, way smarter than Trump, way more willing to do and say what it takes to get what they want to have happen than Trump. There's a lot of these scary national fascists who are waiting to step into the wings. They're waiting to step out of the wings and take the main stage, and pretending like Trump is the be all end all of scary politicians is a bad mistake. Sorry, let's get back to part 2.
Senator Vance, you oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time,
interesting pink
tie
choice
of a school shooter were convicted of
I saw that or noticed that really early on. And good for him. Wanted to do something a little different.
Responsible to curb mass shootings. I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to
just want to
school with
speak
such
for a second
hope
about my
and
three
such
average
joy and
children
such pride
and
at their
their
little faces on the first day of school. And we
competent looks.
know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence.
Think
And
about
of
my
course, our
kids,
hearts go out to the families
my
that are
my
affected by
three
this terrible
kids, one
stuff.
of whom
And
is
we do
really
have to do
bright, one
better.
of whom is a
And I
pain
think
in
that
my
Governor
ass,
Walz and
one
I
of
actually
whom I
probably
just wish
agree
I
that we
hadn't
need to do
bothered
better on
having.
this. The question is just how
We
do
call
we
her
actually do it?
the accident.
Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me
I
about
don't believe in
this
it.
epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90%, in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed
like
with
Democrats.
illegally obtained
Okay.
firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala
Have you
Harris's
heard this
open
talking
border,
point
we've seen a
online that
massive influx in the
90%
number of
of
illegal
all mass
guns
shooters are
run by the
Democrats?
Mexican drug cartels? So that
Ah!
number, the amount of illegal guns in our
Right.
country is higher today than it was
Well,
three
I
and a half
think the
years
one
ago.
talking
But
point
what
I
do
have
we
heard
do
is
about the schools? What
transgender.
do we do to
Like, all these
protect our
people are
kids? And I
like
think
on
the answer is, and I say this not loving the
medication
answer,
for that, or
because I don't want my kids to go to
antidepressants, or all this
school
stuff.
in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible
Something I might
signs
be
of
afraid of.
security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger.
Except for the
And of
two
course,
people
we've got
that
to
took shots
increase
at
school
Trump,
resource
they're both
officers, because the
Republicans.
idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent
Need to make the
experience. So we've
doors
got to make our
stronger,
schools
make the
safer.
locks
And I think we've got
better.
to have some common
This
sense
is ridiculous.
bipartisan solutions
Need to make
for how
these
to do that.
schools locked down
Governor, you
so
have 2
that when we
minutes.
have a shooter in there, the
I think
cops
all the
can't
parents
get in.
watching
It's not their
tonight,
fault that they
this is
don't
your
want to
biggest
get in. They
nightmare.
just
Look,
can't get in.
I got
Well,
a
a couple years
17-year-old
back, they wanted to
and
arm the teachers.
he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we've enacted enhanced red flag laws, enhanced background checks, and we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence.
You also
And this
don't need a
idea
weapon
that we should just
that
live with it. And
deadly.
here's
You
what I
don't
do
need those
think.
weapons. You're
This
not
is a
going to go
good start to
hunting
the
with an
conversation.
AR-15.
I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that work. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general,
It's so great if we
worked
bring
on
the
this
founding
issue.
fathers
She
forward
knows
in
that it's
time and
there.
be like, look at
No
these
one's
crazy
trying to
weapons we have. They'd be
scaremonger and
like,
say
are you
we're
kidding
taking
me?
your
You have
guns, but I
access to
ask
that?
all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go when we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills? They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said actually about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. Is okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines,
that do not need to
terrible
exist.
gun violence
You
problem
would never want to
in a
kill a
lot
deer
of our
that
big
way, let
cities.
alone a human
And
being.
this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools, we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but it only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was the NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety.
He
I'm of an
became
age where
friends with school
my shotgun was in
shooters.
my
You
car
didn't
so I
mean
could
that.
pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention.
Remember, he's a
on this is
knucklehead that sometimes
talking about cities and where it's at. The number one, where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides.
That's a rough one, though.
And we have an epidemic of
Well, I
children
became
getting
friends with
guns
school
and shooting
shooters,
themselves.
and
So we
they
have,
wouldn't have been
and we
able.
should
They wouldn't have
look
been
at
able
all
to
the
commit
issues.
those shootings if we had had a
Making
ban.
sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns. And there are things that you can do
The
about it. But I
lethality of
do
guns
think that
today
this is
is
one,
off the
and I think this is a
charts.
healthy
It's off the
conversation.
charts. It doesn't
I
need to
think
be
there's a
that way.
capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment.
Every
protect our
time
children.
JD
That's my
Vance
priority.
gives the sort of
Gentlemen, thank you.
sideways look
Margaret?
out at the camera,
Thank
it
you,
was
Nora.
like, "Did you
Let's
catch
turn
that?
now to the
It's the
top
guns.
contributor
He wants
to
to take your
inflation,
guns."
the high cost of housing and rent.
He uses
Christ,
his
that's
There's a
Sideways
sideways
shortage of
looks.
more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million
Now, in your
new
market,
homes.
$25,000
building
toward your
these
down payment
homes
might
and
have
won't
made a
handing out that kind of
dent.
money
Would that
just
have been a
drive up
benefit
prices
where you
higher?
when you
No, it's
bought a
not
house?
handing out. We have, first, let me say this,
Yeah.
this issue of housing.
I
and
had
think
to
those
put
of you
about
listening on
20,000
this,
down.
The problem we've had is that we've got a lot of
20,000
folks
down.
that see
But
housing
That
as
was
another commodity.
that was
It can be bought up. It can
7
be
years
shifted.
ago,
It can be
and my
moved
house is
around.
worth double now.
Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the
I
Vice
just have
President
hopes that my rent won't
pushing
increase so
forward
much
and
that I
bringing
have
a
to
new
move
way of
again
approaching
while
this
my kid
is
is in
something
high
we're doing in
school.
Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal
We need
level,
a tax
but
credit
local
for
folks make it
renters.
easier to build those homes.
More
And then
people
that
are
down
renting
payment
than ever in
assistance. I
America.
can tell all of
It's
you
good to
out
stay
there,
that way.
one of the, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we've put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance. We get it back from people because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids
People
able to
with
be able to
stable
get to
jobs
school.
can get
All of those
stable
things in the
housing.
long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising? And what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of
This is
home
a
prices in
ridiculous
the country.
talking
It's
point.
why
There's
we
not a
have
home scarcity
massive
in this nation,
increases in
not
home
by a
prices
long
that
shot.
have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien
And quote,
populations
illegal aliens
under
are not
Kamala
buying up
Harris's
all the
leadership. Now,
houses.
Tim just mentioned
No.
a bunch of
They're
ideas.
not coming here
Now,
with
some of
that
those
kind of
ideas I
wealth.
actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit
The
around
vice
and
presidency.
campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable.
And the vice
Now, you
president
asked,
needs to
Margaret,
do
what
more.
would
That's what I'm getting from
immediately
this.
change the equation for American
Give more power
citizens
than I thought.
if you lower energy prices. As Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill. One of the biggest drivers of housing costs, aside from illegal
It's
immigration,
amazing
is
that's
think
still
about
a
it.
talking
If a truck
point from
driver's paying
Sarah
40%
Palin to
more for
now.
diesel, then the lumber
Drill,
he's
baby,
delivering
drill.
to the job
Jesus.
site to build the house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods too.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer
Is there any more
where
bullshit that wants to come out of your mouth?
Governor, we will get to you in a moment, but Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot.
He's going to take away the military
bases.
bases.
We have a lot of Americans.
Oh,
that need
yeah.
homes.
That's
We
the
should be
federal land he
kicking out
means.
illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens.
Many
who deserve
federal
to be here.
Lands
Senator,
are
your time is up.
not
Governor, I do want to let you
suitable for
respond
homes
to
to be
the
built.
allegation that the vice president is letting in.
Well, of course, that's not
migrants,
true. And
and
again,
that
you
it's
have the
affecting
facts. I
housing
guess we
prices.
agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's again blaming and not trying to find the solution. I was going to ask though on this question, are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make
Right.
some
I
investments.
mean,
that gets people.
they
in.
should be
And I
really
still,
hitting on that issue because
on
that's
the fact
truly
on this,
when they're talking
economists,
about, oh,
you-
we've got these
Senator
federal
Vance, you
lands we
said
can
you don't
build
like
on.
the
They're talking about
economists.
let's
Which
sell
economists
the
are
federal
saying that
lands
it
to
is
BlackRock.
immigrants that's adding to the
Yep.
cost?
Governor,
Where's
your
the study?
time is
Yeah.
time
Well,
is up.
BlackRock,
but
we have to do an
Senator,
episode on
that
BlackRock,
point,
Mark.
I'd like for you to clarify. There are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're
Migrants
happy to
are
share after the debate.
making the
We'll put it
housing
up on
prices
social
go
media,
higher. This is
actually, that
just
really
such a
drills down on the connection
ridiculous
between
talking point.
increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing
Increased
prices. Now, of course,
levels of
Margaret,
migration.
that's not the
That would have
entire
been my
driver of
family
higher
moving
housing
all over the
prices. It's
country when I was a
also
kid.
the regulatory
You don't have to
regime
come
of
from
Kamala
another
Harris.
country to
Look,
be
we are a country of
migrating around the
builders. We're a
country.
country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly
Oh,
have a
Jesus, we're not a
federal
country of
administration that
explorers.
makes it harder to develop our resources, makes it harder to build
But
things.
he's
and
so
let's
good at
throw
like
people in
hitting
jail
these
for not
pro-America
doing
talking points
everything
and these
exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to
crafting
do.
the
And what
narrative
that
and trying to
means is
shape
that you have a
things
lot
into
of people
the
who would love to
American
build homes
mythos
who
and
aren't
the
able
you
to
know
build homes. I
making the
actually
whole
agree with
right
Tim Walz.
wing
We should get out of this idea of housing
ridiculousness
as a
sound
commodity.
somehow
But the thing that has most turned
appealing.
housing into
And
a
this guy
commodity
I think
is
this guy
giving
is
it
scary,
away to
legitimately.
millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that, that in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to
Country
be able
filled
to
with
get out of your
abandoned
house
strip
in a
malls
fire.
and
I
fallen
think you
down
want to make
homes. How
sure
about
that
we
it's
rebuild where
fireproof
we've
and those
already
types of
built?
things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing
You
crisis.
can't
I can
have
tell.
that much still
But
to
Nora?
get through. You got
Thank you.
15 minutes
One of the
left of the
top
debate,
problems
lady.
facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, At the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, "I have concepts of a plan." Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill
I
Americans
have
get
concepts
health
of a
insurance.
plan.
Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care. I believe,
Of
members
course,
of my
I'm
family
going to
actually
just
got
say a
private health
thing that
insurance,
is
at least
a
for the first
blatant
time, switched off of
campaign
Medicaid
lie,
onto
but
private insurance for the first time
let's
under
talk
Donald Trump's
about
leadership. And I think
Trump's
that,
talking
a lot
points
of people
instead.
have criticized this
Right.
concepts of a plan remark. I think it's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress, you're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything.
Donald
because
Trump
part of
wouldn't
this
read
is the
it.
give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now,
Right.
when
Donald Trump
was
wouldn't read a
actually president, and
9-page
again,
bill.
he
He
has a
couldn't even
record
pick
to be
up a
proud of.
900-page bill.
Prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the
But
first
let's
time
be
in a
fair.
very long time. Under
No one
Kamala
in
Harris's
fucking Congress
leadership,
would read
No.
a
prescription drugs
900-page
are up
bill
about
either.
7%.
No, they
Under Donald Trump's entire
staff
4
read it.
years, they were up about 1.5%.
The lobbyists
He
would write it.
introduced
They would vote
pricing
on it if the
transparency.
lobbyists
Think
told
about
them to, and
healthcare.
it'd be a
You
done
go into
deal
a
or not.
hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody
He's also
knows what
said
it
that he's
actually
had
costs.
something
That
better
price
to replace it
transparency
with
will
since
actually give
2015.
American
Never
consumers
gives any
a little bit
details,
more choice, and will also
put
drive
anything
down
forward.
costs. And we talked about, the reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both
Like
the
with
chronically
abortion.
ill, but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think it's an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump
Bizarre
has
talking
ever
points.
said
Knowing you
or
can
ever
say
done.
things,
But
and there's
when
just not enough
Obamacare
time to
was
get back and
crushing
dig
under
into
the
that
weight
shit.
of its own regulatory
Because
burden and
Republican
healthcare
supporters
costs,
really want
Donald
to hear
Trump
that
could have
Donald Trump
destroyed the
helped
program.
save
Instead,
Obamacare.
he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans
People
had
are calling it
access
the
to
Affordable
affordable
Care
care.
Act. They like
It's
that.
not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do, but I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better healthcare policies. He's earned it because he did
He
it
should have done it in
successfully
his
the
first
first
4
time.
years.
Governor?
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic, all of those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive
Replace it
order
with something
to
so much
repeal
better.
the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost
That's
at
so
the
much
Supreme
better
Court.
was pretty good.
And
That was
he
a pretty
would
good
have
Trump,
repealed
pretty
the
good Trump
ACA
voice there, Adam.
had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill. Now, fast forward, what that means to you is you lose your pre-existing conditions. If you're sitting at home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that'll be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I've got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They figure they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris will protect and enhance the ACA.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet explained how you would protect people with pre-existing conditions or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit
People
better.
get denied
What
all
Governor
the
Walz
time
just
for that
said
shit.
is actually not true. A lot of what happened and the
Kinds of
reason that
workarounds
Obamacare
that
was
the
crushing under
healthcare
its own weight is that a lot of
insurance
young and healthy
companies
people were leaving the exchanges.
employ.
Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump
Young
was
and
president,
healthy people
inflation was
probably
low,
were
take-home pay
abandoned in
was
the plan
higher,
because
and he
Republicans
saved
went and
the
made
very
sure that
program
they,
from a Democratic
overturned the
administration that was
whatever the
collapsing and
rule
would
was
have
that required
collapsed
everyone to do it,
absent
right?
his
Like
leadership.
Yeah.
He
I forget
did
the
his
phrase,
job,
but
which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the
Because Donald
Affordable
Trump
Care Act
solves
go up
things. I
under
never
the
hear him
Trump
complain
administration?
about anything.
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this of young people or whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans
individual
fought
mandate.
tooth and
That's
nail
what it is.
saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then
So
what
you
happens
think the
is
individual mandate's a good idea?
you shrink. I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect
People
it
believe in
to be there.
privatism, Social
And when
Security.
we
They
are
don't
able to
believe
make
in
it, and we are
everybody
making it
pays
this way,
in to help
when
each
we
other out. They don't
incentivize
believe in
people to
that.
be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I heard people say, well, I don't want to buy into Medicare or whatever. Good luck buying health care once you get past 70. So look, the ACA works. We can continue to do better. Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the first time in American history.
Thank
Isn't
you,
that
Margaret.
Can I
We're-
address that?
I apologize. We're out of
Go
time.
ahead,
We have a
Laura.
number of subjects to discuss. Margaret?
Let's talk about families in America. There is a child
Let's
care
do.
crisis
Let's talk about
in
families
this
in
country,
America.
and the United
Yeah.
States is one of
I'm
the very
sure,
few developed countries in the
Vance will bring
world
up his 3
without a
beautiful
national
children.
paid leave program for new parents.
And the one ugly
Governor
one.
Walz, you've said that if
Right.
Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Well, if we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies, Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start. The family works better. We stay in their employers. We get more consistency in that.
I
So
say
Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in
somewhere between
Minnesota,
6
and we
months
see
and a
growth.
year.
That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue. Those big companies are able to offer it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some cases, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest.
Why
He's
do you
willing to
think
say,
the
"Bump
vice
those
presidential
unions up, do
debate, these guys
whatever."
are able
What we're
actually to
saying is
talk
the
about so
economy
much
works best
policy,
when
and
it works
the
for all of us. And so a
Trump
paid
Harris
family
couldn't. I mean,
medical
we know
leave
why
program,
Trump
and I will
couldn't
tell you,
because
go
dude's
to
dumb and
the
has no
families
policy.
or
But
go to the
why
businesses and ask
why
them,
could Harris
as
only
far as
have her 3 or
childcare on
4
this,
talking
you
points?
have
Why
to
was she
take it
not
at
able
both
to
the
go in
supply
depth
and the
about
demand
stuff?
side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take care of our
My
children
answer is
or our
debate
parents
preparation.
to get paid the least amount of money.
I
And we
think
have
that
to make it easier for folks to be
this
able to
guy
get into
knew
that
he
business
had to
and then to make
bring
sure
this
that
kind
folks
of
are able to pay
information
for that.
against
We were able to do it in Minnesota,
Vance,
and I'm still telling you
whereas
this. We
Harris
were listed
was
as the best
never
state. We're
informed
still in
that she was going
crisis
to have
on
to go
this.
toe to toe
A
with
federal
Trump on
program of
policy.
paid family medical leave
So
and
it
help
wasn't
with this
about that.
will enhance our workforce,
Harris's
enhance our
debate
families,
preparation
and
was
make
all
it
just
easier
about
to have the
attacking
children
Trump
that you
and
want.
embarrassing Trump
Governor, your
and baiting
time is
Trump.
up. Senator, do you support a national paid leave program? And if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are home taking care of their newborn. You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats too have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who's an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator. And I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company, but the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids.
Most mothers
We
do
should
not want
have
to go
a
back to
family
work
care
immediately
model
after
that
having a
makes
child.
choice
I don't know what you're
possible. And I think this is a very important substantive
Right.
difference.
And
between
offering
Donald Trump and
paid
Kamala
family
Harris's
leave
approach.
doesn't
look,
force
if
you to
look
stay
at the
home.
federal
Like your
programs that we
employer
have that support paid
we can
family
say,
leave
hey,
right now, the community
both
development block
mothers
grant,
and
there's
fathers
another
can
block
have
grant
up to 6
program that
months of
spends a
paid
lot of
family
money
leave.
from
That
the
doesn't
federal
mean they both
government.
have to stay home for
These
6 months. If
programs
you want to go
only
back to
go
work,
to
fucking
one
go
kind
back
of
to
child
work.
care model.
Maybe
Let's
it's
say you'd
because
like your
he's
church
known a lot of
maybe
women that have
to help you
gotten
out with childcare.
abortions,
Maybe
but
you
I've
live in
known
a
a lot of
rural
women that
area
have
or
had
an urban
babies
area,
and
and
they
you'd
would
like
have
to
stayed
get
home
together
longer with
with
their kids.
families in your neighborhood to provide childcare in the way that makes the most sense.
Yeah,
You don't get
that's
access to
overwhelming.
any
Parents
of
want to
these
spend
federal
more
monies.
time at
We
home
want
with
to
their
promote
newborn kids.
choice
Overwhelmingly.
and how we deliver family care and how we promote childcare. Because look, it is unacceptable. And, of course, Tim
they'd
and I have
like
been
to have
on
a
the
little more
campaign trail
help
a
because,
lot the
dear
past 7
God,
or
it
8
is
weeks.
tiring to
And one of the
have
biggest
a
complaints I
young
hear from young families is people who feel like they don't have options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot better.
Senator, thank you.
Mr. Douglas is
You have
whining over
also
there
said,
somewhere.
Senator Vance, many things about the American family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on childcare as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President
Republicans let the
Trump
child tax
recently
credit
said,
go.
as much as childcare is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers. It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan.
I mean,
Cut
if that was
taxes
really
for
the
American
plan, I'd be
workers and American
all of.
families. Cut taxes for
I
businesses
agree.
that are hiring
Penalize
and
countries
building
that use
companies in
slave
the United
labor,
States of
right?
America, but penalize companies and
Including our
countries that
own.
are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the
Right.
economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we
I mean,
bring
I
in
gotta
this additional
say,
revenue with higher
philosophically at
economic
least,
growth,
Donald
we're going to
Trump
be able to
is
provide paid family leave, child
a
care
little bit of an
options that are viable,
isolationist. Like he
workable for
does.
a
I mean,
lot
he
of
says the
American
words
families.
anyway. Like,
Yeah, he says
philosophically,
the
he'd
word.
love
Can you
to.
clarify
He'd
how
love
that
to
will
be an
solve the
isolated
childcare
America.
shortage?
He
He
doesn't want
has
to
never
pay.
ran
Because, as Tim
businesses
said, a lot of the
ever
childcare
that way.
shortages, we just don't
No,
have
he doesn't
enough
want to pay
resources
what it would
going into
cost
the
to pay
multiple
American workers
people
to
who
do the
could be
stuff here,
providing
right?
He
family care
uses
options.
immigrants.
And we're going to have to,
He
unfortunately, look, we're going to have to
builds
spend
his
more
products
money.
in
We're going to have
China.
to induce more people to want to provide childcare options for
Right. I
American
mean,
families.
all
Because the reason it's so
all
expensive
these
right now
politicians
is
on both
because you've
sides
got
of the
way
aisle are
few people providing this
neoliberal,
very essential service.
Thank you,
capitalist
Senator. Governor Walz, your
water
ticket
carriers,
also
right?
has some
They like if
childcare
the
tax credit
corporations want to send
proposals.
the
Do
labor
you think
overseas,
Congress
they're
will
all in
agree to
favor
the
of that. Like
$6,000 credit
capital,
for
we
newborns and
have
$3,000
absolutely
credit
open
for
borders
children
for
over the
capital.
age of
If
6,
you have
as
money,
your
if you are
campaign
wealthy,
has
if you want to just
promised? Is
ship
that
your
realistic?
work or your workers
Well,
anywhere
if
across
these
the
members
world
of
with no
Congress are
penalty,
listening to
that
anybody, I can
there's
tell
you've
you,
got
and
open borders for
this
sure.
is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's 5,000 or 6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarships types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, you're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another 4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And so I think the issue here is those members of Congress, I
They
can't
just
believe
love
they're
to
not. When I
find a
go to
thing to hit
businesses,
Trump with,
sure, they'll
just no
talk about
matter what.
taxes sometime, but they will lead with childcare and they will lead with housing.
I'm
Because
surprised it
we
hasn't
know
been
the
brought up
problem
that
is,
he's been
especially in a
saying
state
on
like
stump for the
Minnesota,
last
we
week
need
that
more
we should be
workers
getting
because our
rid
economy's growing, but we need the
the
workforce.
education department. We should
Governor,
be getting
thank
rid
you.
of
We need
colleges.
to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation. After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results. Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the inflation crisis caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused
We
on.
call
I
it
want to answer your
Dodge.
question because you did ask it.
Oh,
Look,
please.
what President Trump has
And-
said
and-
is
and
that there were
as
problems in
much
2020,
as
and my own
Walz
belief is that
and
we should
Harris
fight
just
about
wanted
those
to,
issues, debate those issues
find
peacefully
anything they could
in
to
the
nail
public
Trump.
square, and that's
This
all
dude
I've
really
said,
is
and that's
like
all that Donald Trump has
Harris's
said.
policy.
Remember, he
What
said that on
fucking
January the
policy?
6th, the protesters ought to
Harris
protest
has no
peacefully.
policies.
And on
She's
January
done
the
nothing.
20th, what
She's a
happened?
vice president.
Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration.
Oh,
I
it's the
believe that we actually
Harris-Biden
do have a threat
administration.
to
See, they're
democracy in
trying
this
to make
country,
it
but
as if
unfortunately,
she's been
it's not the
president
threat
for
to
a while.
democracy
Yeah,
that
no,
Kamala
absolutely
Harris
are.
and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their
I
fellow
don't want to
citizens.
appear
And it's
impatient,
Kamala
but
Harris
CBS,
saying
we're at
that
90
rather than
minutes.
debate and persuade her fellow Americans,
Well,
she'd like to
we're a
censor
little
people
behind.
who engage in misinformation.
Are we?
I
Okay.
think that is a
Yeah,
much bigger threat
just
to
a little
democracy
bit,
than
not enough
anything
to
that we've
be
seen in this country
more
in
than
the last 4 years,
30
in the
seconds,
last
Kevin.
40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by two lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. And of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial
The
scale.
Trump team is thrilled that they've got the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy and
that to me is a much bigger
Tulsi
threat to
Gabbard,
democracy
and
than
the
what Donald Trump
Harris
said when he
team is
said that
thrilled that they've got the
protesters should
endorsement
peacefully
of Dick
protest on
Cheney.
January the 6th.
Governor?
They changed the
Well,
QR
I've
code.
enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of
No,
commonality.
they
here,
did.
and
There's
I'm
no
sympathetic and
CBS
misspeaking on
Big
things, and I think I
Brother
might
eye
have
in the center
with,
anymore.
with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this, and the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very
Big Brother
clear.
eye must
I mean,
have
he lost
worked.
this election, and he said he didn't. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day, some with the American flag, several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state capitol grounds in St. Paul and said, "We're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties." The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police. That issue, and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American history that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power. And here we are 4 years later in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country apart.
Margaret?
Senator
They
Vance,
avoid
did you want to
shaking
respond to
hands
that?
now
Yeah,
after
well,
the
look,
end of
Tim,
the debate.
first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time. And if we want to say that we need to respect the results of the election, I'm on board. But if we want to say, as Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had, I don't buy that.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think a revisionist history on this. Look, I don't understand how we got to this point. But the issue was that happened. Donald Trump didn't do it. And all of us say there's no place for this. It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something, that's not censorship.
It's about
Censorship
the continual
is book
rightward
We've
shift
seen that.
because we
We've
don't
seen
have
that
an
brought up.
opposition party
I just
to
think
any
for
right-wing
everyone
movement.
tonight, and I'm going to thank Senator Vance. I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement. But this is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater.
Tough one for him, but he still spun it.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of
but
Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't
Senator,
wear
the governor
masks.
does have the floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to respond to you.
Yeah, well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this, I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is, where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates. The CBS News vice presidential debate continues.
So I hope it doesn't continue. I got to I hope that we're going to do the commercial break, and then we'll do our wrap up, our final statements, right? But
yeah, I think it's going to be that.
I'm glad there's not going to be a second Harris Trump debate. I think this was a great debate to end on. It's been a fascinating hour and a half watching these two guys talk and how they spin it. And again, I think Vance did a slightly better job spinning things his direction than Walz did. They both clearly had their talking points, but they were both able to really extemporaneously talk about policy and listen to each other and respond to each other and answer the questions that the moderators were giving in ways that we have not seen in any debate as of yet. Based on debate performance alone, I think either of these two guys are more competent to be president than either of the tops of the tickets. I'm not saying I would like what they do necessarily, but they both seem more competent to be president than either Harris or Trump.
Yeah. I don't disagree. I think that last talking point at the end there, the Democrats really want there to be some meaning behind the January 6th stuff and the fact that Trump has spent the last 4+ years saying that he didn't lose. But I think most Americans don't care.
I agree.
I think a lot of Americans didn't like what happened on that day, but hold back from completely blaming him for it. And I think that Vance's talking point of saying, well, he did peacefully leave. I think that's kind of what a lot of people think. It's like, well, he did leave, and it's not like he did anything to stay. But it's just more of kind of the childish nature of Donald Trump, that he will never admit defeat. He will never say that he did something wrong. He'll never try to make amends for anything he ever did. It's not in him. And as far as what you've said about these guys, yeah, it's partially why I liked RFK Jr. for a short time, because it was refreshing to hear someone able to talk at least somewhat properly on these topics and be able to give answers that, whether it's filled with some hyperbole or not, it was still something that made you think, okay, well, this person can at least answer the question and has given some thought to the topics that they're being given. Whereas Donald Trump never answers a question. And I think, like I said earlier, Harris was kind of conditioned in her debate prep to not have to worry about that. Right. Steer the narrative where we wanted to go and try to embarrass him by getting him upset and making him go off on his tangents. Yeah. That wasn't going to happen with JD Vance.
She ignored the first question so that she could give her policy sound bites and then pivot to attacking Trump and baiting Trump. And then it could always go back like, hey, I gave policy because she knew he wouldn't, but didn't have to go deeply. Yeah, it's sad that was, the tactic they chose, and understandable. Like, I get it, but all right, let's hear the closing arguments.
It's also sad that the vice president sounds a lot more capable of doing the job than the president's running.
So Governor Walz, you are first. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Senator Vance. Thank you to CBS News. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift, and a whole bunch of folks in between there. And they don't all agree on everything, but they are truly optimistic people. They believe in a positive future of this country, and one where our politics
wasn't really paying attention. Did he say Dick Cheney?
And I have to tell you,
that
absolutely did. Yeah,
better than it is.
Proud
is
that
the
we've got
optimism that there can be an opportunity economy that works for everyone, not just to get by, but to get ahead. And the idea that freedom
I've
really
lost the
means
first
something.
person he said.
Not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room,
Bernie Sanders.
but the freedom for you to make choices. about
Right.
yourself.
Bernie Sanders,
Now, look,
Dick
we
Cheney,
all know
Taylor
who
Swift.
Donald
I'm
Trump is.
proud
He's
of the
told us, and
coalition
as Maya
Kamala has
Angelou
put
said,
together, from
believe him
Bernie
when he told you that.
Bernie
His
Sanders
first inaugural
to Dick
address
Cheney
talked about
to
American
Taylor
carnage.
Swift.
And then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th for Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz, thank you. Senator Vance, your closing statement.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies.
Cold winter nights.
I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that too has gotten harder with Kamala because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say, I'm so proud to be doing this and I'm rooting for you. God bless you and good night.
Senator Vance, thank you. And thank you both for participating in the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle. I'm Margaret Brennan.
And I'm Nora O'Donnell. And a reminder, there are just 35 days until Election Day. Please get out and vote.
35 days till Election Day.
CBS News.
I wish it was
Thank
tomorrow.
you and good night.
I wish it was tomorrow, too. I'm sort of ready to be done. We got candidates still to interview. Well, there it is. They shook their hands. They're still chatting congenially. That's nice. Their handlers are heading on up. Oh, well, wives. Their wives are handling.
Oh, okay. Well, they're handlers. No.
Their wives are probably their handlers to a degree. Yep, I agree. Yeah, it's fascinating. I love that they're still chatting. Okay, well, there we go. Probably the final debate of the presidential cycle is over.
Yeah, let's see what they're saying real quick, because we did
right.
listen to the commentators last time. 1 second.
All right, we'll give them a minute or
which is
two.
the Middle East and the kinds of foreign policy surprises that hit any president. Tim Walz made the case that Donald Trump's temperament is unfit for any kind of surprise, cited the members of the Trump administration who have attested to that. Vance came back and said there were no wars during
Oops,
the Trump administration. On the economy, I'll make a political point, which is that what Vance did was something Donald Trump was incapable of doing during his presidential debate, which is repeatedly saying, if Kamala Harris was going to do these things, why didn't she in office? Now, whether voters buy that or not, Tim Walz mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act and a variety of other items under Biden. But returning to that political point has worked in the past for Donald Trump against Hillary Clinton. We'll see if it works this time. I'd like to make a final point on tone. The J.D. Vance on that stage was very different than what people may have seen in podcasts. But then there was an air of unreality about it. He talked about bipartisan solutions with nuance of a kind we never saw during the Trump administration. He talked about Donald Trump almost as the defender of the Affordable Care Act. Donald Trump tried to kill the Affordable Care Act. And then I think at the very end of the debate, we saw something extraordinary. Tim Walz asked J.D. Vance if Donald Trump lost the election. He was incapable of answering that simple yes, no question. J.D. Vance can only get so far from the man at the top of the ticket. And that was on display in that one moment, although J.D. Vance was a different kind of person than we've seen in many instances.
John, I think what you're saying is so important when we talk about demeanor because of the expectation that was hanging over these candidates heading into tonight. J.D. Vance came to the stage with the lowest likability rating of all four candidates at the top of the ticket. And I think many people came in expecting him to be Donald Trump's attack dog tonight. That's not the side we saw from him. There was a couple of compassionate moments even. You mentioned the word cordiality. We saw that from him very much. I also think it's worth pointing out the demeanor we saw from Governor Walz, particularly when it came to his moments where he was put on the defensive about his own biography and embellishments that he has made in the past, particularly in this case on China. You and I have talked about this a lot coming into this evening. Major, you're going to help us with fact checks over the course of the next few minutes. But there is a big one that we need to talk about at the top of it, which came on immigration in the discussion tonight, and particularly the Trump administration's plan, a major centerpiece of their campaign to undergo mass deportations for undocumented immigrants in this country. J.D. Vance particularly said that migrants will be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border one. This was in the conversation, this ongoing conversation about Haitian migrants in Springfield, Ohio. Many of them are recipients of temporary legal status. And we just have to say, John, that they are in this country legally.
All right, we will be right back in a moment with more coverage of the vice presidential debate, and we'll fact check some of the claims made by both candidates.
Let's stick around for that if we can. Let's see what happens here. Wait, let me just mute them. Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, I don't know how they would have been able to, or Walz would have been able to do it, but I feel like the way that Harris hasn't been able to separate herself from Biden's policies is an extension of how Vance went after her tonight. Instead of him saying, oh, well, she's, a party to Biden's policies, he just flipped it and said, no, these are her policies. Right. Because she hasn't really stepped outside of them in any way or talked how she would be any different. And it made Walz not be able to defend her and say, well, she's just the vice president. Because if he said that, then it would kind of knock down what the Democrats have been trying to say about her in general, which is that she's capable to do the job because she's been basically doing the job. And we all know, as you said, the vice presidency is just a backup role. You're going to go kiss babies and you're going to go cut ribbons and you're going to stay away from the president as much as you can because you are the backup if something goes wrong.
And frankly, and they wouldn't do this because the people that handle the Democratic Party, right? The big money donors, the only people that the Democrats actually represent, they are all in on Biden. I mean, they'll mostly be in on Trump too, right? Like, Trump will protect their profits, but they're all in on Biden. The campaign promise he absolutely kept. Nothing will fundamentally change. And that's what Harris wants to play off of. She could get out there on the stump and say, hey, you know what? I disagree with Joe on this issue or this issue or this issue. And when I'm president, I'll have the ability to do this instead. I don't, here's the plan that I want to do. I haven't done that now because I'm the vice president and it's my job to be there and support and help him make his policies come into fruition. But just because I'm there working on his team doesn't mean I agree with everything he does. And here's how I would do things differently, which would then really undercut that Republican talking point that, oh, she's the border czar and oh, she's done this and this and this. Like, she can say, no, I haven't. That's Joe Biden. That's Joe Biden. And I'm here supporting his job because it's his administration and he sets the priorities. And when I'm president, I'm going to do this instead.
Yep.
But the people who are in charge of the Democrats, the big money funders, they like what Joe does, right?
Yeah.
Fascinating how for a hot second while I can, after Biden broke the rail worker strike, now that he got all the ports on strike, Biden came out and said that, we've never broken a strike and we've never interfered in a strike and we never would. And I thought, well, that's a lie.
The
maybe
railroad
you just don't remember.
Yeah, the railroad workers just got even more pissed off. Yeah, he probably doesn't remember though.
Right.
Union Joe wouldn't do that, Mark.
Have been to date. It was, in a way, a kind of embrace of bipartisanship on tough issues: gun violence, healthcare, childcare, even, well, this was less true, on reproductive rights. And one thing that I think will be a surprise to anyone in the Republican Party, the biggest secret of the entire Trump administration is that he saved Obamacare. It's a big secret because he never even said that. But this debate was an example to the country of how you can disagree agreeably, how you can talk about shared goals for the country. And in that sense, I think it's extremely important for J.D. Vance that he did not sound as he sounds on the stump. It was his biography and his appeal to bipartisanship that will be most distinguishing about not only his present, but his possible future.
Nancy, your thoughts?
I think if you took a shot every time you heard the words "I agree" tonight, you'd be under the table right now. This was a surprisingly affable debate for two men who we know from our reporting do not like each other. They said that they agreed on housing policy. They said that they agreed on some aspects of immigration policy, on pro-family policy. They were clearly intent on showing that they are likable, that they are agreeable for all the reasons, Cecilia, that you laid out earlier. The Democrats that I'm talking to feel fine about the debate. They're not doing cartwheels the way they were after the Harris and Trump debate a few weeks ago, but they think that this went well for them. And I predict that that exchange between Vance and Walz about whether Donald Trump lost the election is going to end up in a Harris ad by the end of the week.
Bob?
Both of these contenders came to the stage tonight being favorites of the base in their respective parties. Governor Walz was someone who went on television and called Republicans weird. Senator J.D. Vance was someone who would go on podcasts with Donald Trump Jr. and other favorites of the right and say the left was essentially weird. Tonight on stage, you didn't hear a lot about that. You heard an approach to build on our colleagues' reporting and analysis here. It was about appealing to the middle. For J.D. Vance, giving reassurance to traditional Republicans, conservatives, that they have a place in this Republican Party, even with former President Trump. They might not like those traditional Republicans' answer on the election, but they might like his answer on the economy and on border security. And for Governor Walz, it wasn't about being an attack dog. It was trying to make an overture to that centrist voter in a battleground state and say, hey, with Vice President Harris as a teacher and a coach.
Ed Gordon, quickly before we wrap, one of the big issues, though, was immigration, so much so that they had to shut the mics off at one point.
Yeah, but I think the civility that we saw tonight may be a mistake by Democrats, quite frankly. I talked at the outset of energizing this base. I was just in Ohio, and many Democrats were livid about what's going on in Springfield. I think Walz missed an opportunity to really push the racial insensitivity there. There was a sense of trying to be affable, as John said.
Yeah, Walz was needed to be an attack dog more than Vance needed to be. Vance needed to be Donald Trump was already a attack dog. He just needed to be kind of the opposite of that.
Spent a lot of time thinking about Donald Trump. How
Walz would not be this friendly dude from the Midwest.
So
it's just
what
like,
Donald
get in
Trump
there.
will take away is the first third of the
Right,
debate,
but that's his
where
persona,
J.D.
right?
Vance
Like
made a
he's
very strong case that the
this
Trump
friendly,
record,
affable, aw
Was the world on
shucks
fire? Yes
sort
or
of
no? No, it
Midwestern
wasn't.
guy.
Was the economy better?
And
Yes, it was. Trump will be very happy
not that
with
he couldn't have been. I don't
think he will largely
disagree.
ignore
Like
and forget all
the whole
bipartisan appeals
attack
because
dog,
they don't really fit
especially
within his
on the
orientation of politics.
racism
Thank you,
at
Major.
play
There's
with
much
the
more to
whole
talk about. Our coverage will continue
migrant
with instant
crisis that
reaction
they're
polls
playing
and fact
into.
checks. That'll be on CBS News
It's
24/7.
tough
But for
because
now,
the
for all my
Democrats have
colleagues here,
also been leaning into the migrant crisis because the Democrats have been courting conservative votes, right? And so to court conservative votes, they have to play into those conservative narratives. And so if, and this is, I need to make a TikTok for this, right? Because here's the simple fact. The reason no left-leaning voter, no left-leaning group is ever going to be able to push the Democrats to the left is because your vote is already guaranteed. They know they can guilt you and blame you and shame you into voting for them, and they don't have to offer you any concrete policy. The reason that they have to court conservatives is conservatives won't vote for them. If Democrats had any reasonable fear that the left, the American left, was not going to vote for them, that the American left had the intestinal fortitude to stop voting for Democrats until Democrats gave them what they wanted, Democrats would start courting working people again. But they don't have any reasonable belief that the left is going to stop voting for them, so they can just court conservatives. The way Tim could have walked that line, the way Walz could have walked that line would have been leaning into being America's dad and having a stern talking to with Republicans, right? Having this stern, like, listen, we all know that there's problems at the border. We all know that we are having issues with higher migration rates and that there are indeed problems associated with that, but it is not okay to be demonizing your neighbors. It is not okay to lean into these racist dog whistles and pretend that it is some cultural and or ethnic reason for all these problems. The reason is, and then you can lean into climate change, you can lean into America destabilizing, but you have to lean into things that, again, the fundraisers that control the Democratic Party don't want you to lean into. But if Walz was going to become that attack dog, he would have to do it by being dad and scolding the Republicans, right?
Yeah. They're doing the fact check here real quick, and then we'll
All right,
probably wrap
let's
up.
fact check it.
That's it.
That America, you should too. And he didn't say this, but I think many Democrats, if they feel they need to clean this up in any way, will say Tim Walz will never lose an embellishment battle to Donald Trump.
Nancy, I was struck by something J.D. Vance said, which was in the reproductive rights section.
Mm-hmm.
He said on abortion, after hearing about the various consequences of the Roe v. Wade being overturned, he then at one point said there are a lot of people that should be alive. I wonder if that is going to be something that we might see in Harris. In other words, well, yes, the consequences of Roe v. Wade being overturned are not great, and then he tried to move on. But isn't that the point?
Yes, and I think that another challenge for him was that he tried to make the case. He acknowledged that this is a difficult issue for his party, but what he described as the way out of that difficult situation was to say, well, we need to be more pro-family as a party. We need to make it easier for women to have children so that they don't feel like they need to have an abortion. The challenge is that more than half of the country believes that women should have the right to an abortion. And I don't think it's clear that the people who believe that are going to be swayed by, policies that are simply more pro-family.
Bob, what lasts here beyond the end of our conversation in terms of the man at the top of the ticket and the woman at the top of the other ticket?
For Senator Vance, he keeps his relationship with former President Donald Trump, didn't make any major mistakes that would draw Trump's ire. I was tracking Trump's social media all night, positive about Senator Vance. And for Governor Walz, he remains that person who Vice President Harris can count on to go to battleground states and elsewhere and have a convincing personal story about being someone who was a teacher and a coach and comes from an everyday existence in Minnesota, ultimately became a House member
He's lost like
and a
200
governor, but
pounds. He
came
used to
out
be a
of the
bigger guy.
education ranks and served his country in uniform.
Well, good for
We
him
want to go
for
now
that.
to
But
Ed
still,
O'Keefe, who is there at the debate site. Ed, we just heard from our friend Bob Costa here saying that he's been monitoring President Trump and all signs a go, positive reaction. What are you hearing from the Harris-Walz campaign right now after this?
Cecilia, we're in the spin room here, just down the hall from where the debate played out in the CBS Broadcast Center. This used to be a milk processing plant, and it does feel a bit like cattle is being herded here behind us as Senator Vance is now in here, as other surrogates to the two campaigns are now here making their case. The Harris-Walz team suggests that they think he did rather well up against Senator Vance in a few different key moments. One, quoting scripture at that one point during the conversation about immigrants, talking about Matthew 25, the idea that there should be empathy for all people. They say that in their internal measurements of the actual debate, that viewers that were watching liked that scene. The other part that they thought worked pretty well, and that voters watching with them or that they were tracking enjoyed, was the criticism of the Trump tax cuts for wealthier Americans. But they say, and Nancy was making this point earlier, that final exchange regarding the future of democracy on January 6th was most damning. They say that exchange and Vance's refusal to say who exactly won the election, the fact that he dodged questions about it, is something that they will seize on in the coming days as a reminder to skeptics, to those concerned about Trump, that once again, it appears they may be preparing to question the results of the election and stoke concerns about it. Beyond that, there were, at the beginning at least, concerns among Democrats more broadly about how the governor sort of stumbled out of the gates a bit, especially uneasy on those questions about Mideast policy and what exactly the United States should do in terms of Israel's response to Iran. Some conceding perhaps he, like Senator Vance, should be doing more interviews perhaps out on the trail. In the coming days, remember, Governor Walz is headed to central Pennsylvania to campaign. He was supposed to do that with Vice President Harris, who instead will be staying back in Washington and attending to official duties in the coming days. She'll be visiting storm damage in Georgia, and then we anticipate over the weekend heading to North Carolina. So they will not be seen together on the trail as we thought they might, so that she can attend to official duties and he'll continue campaigning in that key state of Pennsylvania, one where, of course, both he and Vance were hoping to win over support tonight.
Thank you, Ed. Caitlin Huey-Burns is also at the CBS News Broadcast Center. Caitlin, what are you hearing from the Trump-Vance camp?
Well, the Trump campaign is essentially doing a victory lap. Quite literally, they were eager to come into this spin room and talk to reporters, senior advisors, campaign manager, and Donald Trump Jr., who, of course, is very close with J.D. Vance and was influential in that decision to name him as VP. But notably, I was talking to a campaign source who was heavily involved in this preparation, and they noted that there was in the prep a kind of conscious effort to focus on J.D. Vance's personal side, knowing that this was going to be an introduction of sorts to millions of Americans watching. And if you think about it, going back to when J.D. Vance was announced as the running mate, remember, he was told 20 minutes before this was announced that he would be the running mate. Then they had the convention, and the focus was very much on the top of the ticket and Donald Trump. And then came these interviews that were discovered that J.D. Vance had done, these controversial statements that he had made in podcast interviews and kind of other forums. They see this as a kind of a reset, but mostly to focus personal stories on the economy, which they believe is a deciding factor in this election.
And his
All right, Caitlin,
beautiful
thank you
children.
so much. Senator Vance and Governor Walz made many claims tonight. Major Garrett has been fact-checking them on the
Be
fly
great
and in
if
real
the
time.
beautiful
Major, you're
children
gonna
was a
start
fact
with opioid
check.
deaths.
That's right. And I just want to let everyone know the CBS
Kinda
News
true.
Confirmed team has done an entire
That would
fact
be
check
funny
of
as
the
hell.
entire debate. You can find those fact checks on social media, CBS
He kept
News,
claiming he
or
had
on our
3 beautiful
website,
children,
CBS
but
News
let's look at those
Confirmed team.
children,
I'm
shall
going
we?
to summarize
Let's take a
3 of
look.
them because they all touch on immigration, which was heavily debated in this process tonight, and the issues all run through one way or another the conversation, national and otherwise, about immigration. Let's start with the first one, dealing with opioid deaths. It came up in the context of immigration. The claim, this was from Governor Walz. Opioid crisis, the good news is in the last 12 months, the nation saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history, 30% decrease in Ohio. The CBS News Confirmed team rates that partially true, and here's why. Our country's only been counting opioid deaths officially since 2015, and in 2024, our nation recorded, sadly, more than 77,000 opioid deaths. That was down 7% from the year before. About 3,000 deaths in 2024, slightly larger than that in Ohio. That was not a 30% decrease. That was an 18% decrease. That's why the CBS News Confirmed team rates that assertion as partially true. Let's go to the next one. And this one has been chewed over extensively in the campaign. J.D. Vance, Republican from Ohio, said, Vice President Harris became the appointed border czar. This could be a semantic issue for some people. We rate it, the CBS News Confirmed team, as false. And here is why. That was never Kamala Harris's title. That was never her designated role. Immigration policy flowed through the president and the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas. What Kamala Harris was appointed to do or asked to do was look at the root causes of immigration in the so-called Northern Triangle countries, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala. That's why we rate that as false. Let's go to our next one. This is something that J.D. Vance said, again, in the context of immigration, housing that is totally unaffordable because we have brought millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. CBS News Confirmed team rates that as partially true. Clearly, and Senator Vance made reference to a Federal Reserve study that says larger migration to America in the Biden administration is one factor in housing stock shortage. But that was a long-running issue dating back to the Great Recession. Americans have been creating more new home stock at a lower rate than at any time since 1960. It is a complex problem. That's why the CBS News Confirmed team rates that assertion from Senator Vance as partially true. John and Cecilia, back to you.
Thank you so much, Major. Republican Senator Tom Cotton joins us. He serves on the Judiciary,
Oh, boy, Tom
Intelligence,
Cotton.
and Armed Services Committee. Senator Cotton, good evening. Good to have you.
Yeah.
Good time
I
to
don't
break
think I
away.
need to hear. I don't need to hear from Tom Cotton.
Tom
So,
Cotton.
A guy I follow, a DSA guy who is running for the state house here. I hope we can have him on before the election. Sean Scott, he just tweeted about 40 minutes ago. Vance seems a new generation of reasonable seeming conservative, able to signal campaign support for childcare and affordable housing, only to dismantle them in office. With no populist opposition, he'll dupe many. The GOP shouldn't be winning on economic fairness. And I think that's the deal. Like I said several times, he seems really good at crafting this narrative, and he seems really good at spinning this stuff, and he seems really affable and well-spoken, and that's the deal, because Democrats are not an opposition party to this. Like, they do not support working people. They do not support populist issues. They do not support the things that poor and working people need. They only support what their wealthy donors support. Thus, there's just no one to offer any sort of substantive counter to that. So Republicans can just say they support this shit. And is it true? Of course it's not true. But so what? Democrats also don't support that shit, and they're not even willing to say it. Like, they will make some noises and they'll talk about little incremental policies and they'll talk about crumbs that they're going to offer people, but they're not willing to just say that we support healthcare and housing and we want to make this better for you Americans, because that's going to scare off the big money donors. So this is why we've seen this continual rightward shift, and Democrats have no one to blame but themselves for this. It is probably the most interesting election season that I remember, frankly, between Americans distressing disconcern for the law breaking that Democrats are doing to help facilitate war crimes, the expanding wars in the Middle East, we got to stand behind the war in Ukraine, Biden dropping out, Harris stepping up, Vance, who seemed like a terrible, after Trump's first assassination shot that was fired, him leaning into Vance, which seemed like he could just lean in as hard as he wanted. Then it seemed bad. But Vance seems to have he's he's doing a good enough job, and Democrats and the media class really trying hard to portray him as a weirdo. But this election did not lead credence to that, right? It's going to make this debate didn't lead credence to that. It's gonna be a hard. He seemed affable enough and polite enough that they're gonna have a hard time with this. And he knew if you go back and watch this again, every time he gave the sideways eyes to the camera while Walz was speaking, that's a moment that is going to be captured by the Republican media class on the Walz's thing to hit it. Like he was listening really well, and he was signaling like, oh, here's a thing for us to hit. Oh, they want to take our guns. Oh, they want to take this. This was a fascinating debate. I enjoyed this one way more than either debate between either of the presidential candidates. I don't want to do it again, but I enjoyed it.
Well, hopefully we're done with these for another 4 years.
Hopefully, yeah. Trying to remember. Now I don't even remember the name of the bar. Damn it. When we were in Ohio, I went and watched a vice presidential debate with someone, Cass, I think it was. We went and watched a vice presidential debate, maybe at the Cat's Eye, fucking it might have been in Athens, Ohio. It was and it was probably the best vice presidential debate I have seen since this one, or that those were the two. Like, we got not quite 20 years. We got 16 years in between vice presidential debates that I've enjoyed, but this one was pretty good, maybe for different reasons, but pretty good. I'm glad we did this one. I wish the other two had been anywhere near this much. This was fascinating, and at least we got to hear questions being answered. This Vance guy is someone to keep your eye on, though. Mark my words. Not just Vance. There's a whole line of these guys who are like Sean said.
Yeah.
A new generation of reasonable seeming conservatives, right? And they're reasonable seeming, but they are nationalist fascists who want to really fucking lean in and dismantle the administrative state, but they have figured out how to talk. And this is Democrats' biggest faux pas, is pretending that Donald Trump is the existential threat and not their refusal to be an opposition party and their insistence on working for incrementalism and allowing this continual rightward shift and pretending that there's not this whole fucking new class of people out there, and you're not going to be able to pull the but Trump that has been the only way they could campaign for the last, what is it now, 8 years? Longer?
9. Started 2015.
This is the third election cycle where their only strategy is but Trump, and it's not one they're going to be able to play forever, and it's going to continue to allow even worse shit to happen. Democrats.
Yeah, I think for those that tune into our show more frequently, I think we're constantly saying that they opened the door for someone like Donald Trump to walk through it, because they really do not present any greater difference between the right wing and what the Democrats have become over the last 30, 40 years. And Donald Trump, as you said, they can say that he's the existential threat. He's the biggest thing that we have to worry about. But it's really more what the Democrats have become that then has pushed the Republican Party even further right. And they're not going anywhere. They're going to stay exactly where they are for some time. So that every year they get further right, and the Democrats seem to then shuffle a little more center right as well. So
Yep, it is. It's just going to get worse from here, folks. All right. Well,
happy ending.
Thank you all for joining us. Like and subscribe. Rate the podcast highly.
Yeah, we
I'm glad
appreciate
for
it.
those of you who joined us on the live stream. Go ahead, and I should have said it sometime earlier, 2 hours ago, but hit the like button. We'll leave the live stream up for a little bit, but I think we should go ahead and drop this as our Friday episode this week as well.
Okay.
I mean, maybe we won't. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, we can talk about it. It'll definitely be the longest episode we've ever had if we do, because
It
2
sure
hours,
will.
18 minutes so far.
It sure will. But yeah, if you're out there listening, watching, please go ahead, like and subscribe, rate us highly, and join us for our regular podcast, which is not usually commentary and watching debates. Usually we have on guests, and slightly less often, Adam and I just talk about issues that we think are important, and we'll do one of those on BlackRock probably. But we got guests coming up soon, so join us for our regular weekly podcast. You can find us wherever you get our podcasts, and you can watch us if you have a Spotify account. All right. Thank you, Adam, and thank you everyone else out there, and join us next time for Rise Up.
Thanks, everybody.
Some answers, a little bit of truth. Some answers, a little bit of truth.